Wells, Spielberg, Kubrick, Hitchcock, Tarantino, Scott, Carpenter. All are names of great renown in the film community. Cinephiles follow their works as benchmarks in cinema. Over the last 20 years, a fresh batch of directors have begun to make their mark, with Peter Jackson, Christopher Nolan, J.J. Abrams, Catherine Bigelow, and James Wan setting new standards in their respective genres. And over the last couple of years, we've had directors like Jordan Peele, Patty Jenkins, Bong Joon-ho, Greta Gerwig, and Ari Aster making their names known. But I want to bring your attention to a director that no one seems to talk about, yet in my opinion has a stellar filmography that shouldn't be ignored, and with 2022's The Batman about to thrust him well and truly into the limelight, I have to ask the question, is Matt Reeves underrated? Now, with a question like that, we first need to look at who is Matt Reeves. Matthew George Reeves was born on April 27, 1966 in Rockville Centre, New York, just over 3 months before England won the World Cup. He would be raised predominantly in Los Angeles, California. He began making movies at the age of just 8 years old, shooting short films with his friends on a wind-up camera. At the age of 13, he befriended one J.J. Abrams, and the two of them would make short films for the Z Channel. Around the age of 16, they were hired by one Steven Spielberg, yes, that Spielberg, to help transfer some of his Super 8 films to tape, which Abrams would go on to homage in his movie Super 8. But back to Matt Reeves. He would attend the University of Southern California, where he would write, direct and produce award-winning student film Mr. Petrified Forest, which would end up as part of an anthology horror movie, Future Shock. Also, co-wrote a script that ended up being the script for Steven Seagal's Under Siege 2. He also had a lecture from one Francis Ford Coppola, which he has stated inspired him. Reeves was obsessed with movies. As stated in an interview, Reeves stated, "It ended up being the tool with which I could make friends because I was too painfully shy in other circumstances. I would say, hey, do you want to make a movie? And that's how I made friends. And it was also my escape." After leaving university, Reeves would co-create TV show Felicity, which ran from 1998 to 2002, and made his feature directional debut in 1996's The Pallbearer. He would spend the next few years directing the odd episode of various TV shows, including Gideon's Crossing and Conviction. Now that we have a rough idea of Reeves' background, now it's time to get into the meat of this video. In 2007, his big break would come at the age of 40 when Paramount Pictures secretly greenlit production on a film called Cloverfield, to be produced by Reeves' longtime friend J.J. Abrams' production company, Bad Robot. The intention was to make America's own Godzilla, and safe to say they succeeded as such, with the Clover, as it is now called, becoming a recognisable movie monster. When talking of the production Cloverfield, Reeves has stated that we wanted it to be as if someone found a handycam, took out the tape and put it in the player to watch it. What you're watching is a whole movie that then turns into something else. The film would also be the debut of TJ Miller, which I personally think is absolutely crazy. The film was marketed brilliantly, with the now infamous teaser playing during showings of Michael Bay's Transformers. Fun fact, the voice screaming, "My God, it's alive, it's huge!" was Matt Reeves. He also voiced the creepy audio recording after the credits stating that it's still alive. The budget for this movie was only around $25 million and was a smash hit, generating a worldwide box office of over $172 million according to Box Office Mojo, and currently holds, at time of writing this, a critic score of 77% and an audience score of 68% on Rotten Tomatoes. For an individual mainly known for writing and directing for TV, it is safe to say that Reeves struck it out the park, and whilst he can't take all the credit, with the marketing campaign undisputedly being a big part of the hype for this movie, if you look at it closely, Matt Reeves directed the hell out of this movie. One clever choice with this movie was its lack of soundtrack, its only score coming a minute and a half into the end credits, and yet the sound design is what carried the tension of this movie, with big events usually being foreshadowed by the sound of flickering lights or groaning building structures acting as their own sort of soundtrack to manipulate the audience's emotions, and the Clover itself only being on screen for less than 3 minutes of this 80-minute runtime, yet its presence was constantly felt. I still think this is one of the best uses of the found footage genre, but it is unfortunately overshadowed by the fact that both Spanish Horror Rec and Paranormal Activity came out the previous year, so the found footage genre wasn't as fresh despite the creature feature spin. Regardless, Matt Reeves was in the spotlight, and he would follow it up with 2010's Let Me In, starring a then up-and-coming Chloe Grace Moretz, which not only had the pressure of being a remake of one of the most critically acclaimed horrors of this century, Let the Right One In, but also the fact that that movie was based on a fantastic book of the same name that breathed new life into the vampire genre during its temporary detour into Twilight territory. I have reviewed both these movies and strongly suggest you check them out. But anyway, principal photography would begin in early November 2009 with a budget of around $20 million. Several creative decisions were made to make this film more widely accessible, with Reeves combining certain characters in the book into one character and reducing some of the main players to just faces in lead character Owen's apartment complex in order to focus on the relationship between Owen and Abby. One thing I personally admire about this movie is that despite there being a blood-sucking vampire next door, the true horror moments in this film are the scenes of bullying, which I still find tough to watch even though my being bullied days are long behind me. On the subject of bullying, Reeves states, "There's a tremendous shame with being bullied. I think there's a level in which you think that there's a reason that you've been singled out, that you're being chosen." This subject was clearly true and dear to his heart, and combining this with his story altercations, he created what I consider to not only be a worthy adaptation to the movie and book that came before, but also a film that stands on its own 2 feet. Reeves had a great love for the story and the Swedish film, to the point where he was originally against making it. He stated, "It's a terrific movie and a fantastic book. I think it could be a really touching, haunting and terrifying film. I am really excited about what it could be. I can understand, because of people's love of the original film, that there is a cynicism that will come in and trash it, where in fact I have nothing but respect for the film. I am so drawn to it for personal and not mercenary reasons. I hope people give us a chance." Sadly for Reeves, despite the film holding a hugely positive score of 88 critic and 76% audience on Rotten Tomatoes, this film only grossed just over $27 million worldwide according to Box Office Mojo. This, I feel, is a shame because Reeves clearly had a passion for the source material, and the way he compressed the story and adjusted certain set pieces and focused primarily on the relationship and the bullying plots really demonstrated his directorial vision, with a highlight being a moment where Owen is looking at a photograph and doesn't need to say anything for the audience to know what he's thinking. Reeves even went to Spielberg for advice on directing child actors, which I personally believed helped in how well he was able to direct these key scenes with Cody and Chloe. There is also a criminally underrated car crash scene that isn't talked about enough. Regardless, Let Me In was a solid outing that not enough people saw, and Reeves continued to show what he could do as a director. Reeves would be lined up to direct a film adaptation of TV series The Twilight Zone, continuing his trend of directing sci-fi and horror movies. Despite him never expecting to be directing movies like this, Reeves has stated, "I discovered the fun of genre is, you get to explore your fears, and you get to use the metaphor of the genre, whether it's a giant monster or a 12-year-old vampire, whatever it is, you can sink something underneath the surface and make a personal film under the guise of a great fun romp." However, he would be approached by 20th Century Fox to direct Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and it was this film that would make him a truly recognizable name. Interestingly enough, this almost didn't happen, as the outline he was presented with didn't have Caesar as the main focus of the movie. Reeves believes Caesar to be the hero of the franchise, and lucky for us cinephiles, Fox agreed to let him change the story, and Reeves thus left the Twilight Zone to work on this movie, and the rest, as they say, is history. That's right, this now iconic trilogy, following the story of Caesar's rise, almost didn't go that way if it wasn't for Matt Reeves' intervention. Whilst he wasn't a part of the original, many argue that Dawn was the peak of this trilogy. It is worth noting that Rupert Wyatt was originally set to continue as director after Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but the intended release date was too short a time for Wyatt to complete the film as he wanted, which opened the door for Reeves, who was confirmed as director in October 2012. In taking the role, Reeves stated in an interview, "I thought this was the most incredible opportunity, because Planet of the Apes, aside from the fantasy element of talking apes, is such an amazing franchise because under the surface of that genre, you're actually looking at human nature." The film was shot over 91 days on a budget of $170 million, by far and away the biggest budget Reeves had ever had to work with. Matt Reeves approached this movie with the mindset of showing that there was potential for it to be a planet of humans and apes, stating, "I wanted to explore that possibility, that this could have become Planet of the Humans and the Apes instead of just Planet of the Apes. So I wanted there to be this hope of connection, as well as this inexorable pull towards what we know the series becomes." This would be the main part of the film, depicting Caesar's reluctance to allow the neighbouring humans into their lands in a tense agreement, with Koba's growing resentment of the situation becoming a key part of the story before the faint hope of this planet of humans and apes quite literally going up in flames. The highlights of this movie came in the form of villain Koba, whom could easily have taken the title for best villain of the decade had it not been for Thanos' rise in Infinity War. What both these villains had in common is that, despite their evil nature and somewhat downright horrible acts of malice and violence, you could understand and sympathise with these greatly flawed characters. The scene where Koba points out human work is fantastically acted and directed. Reeves wrote and told this story of many viewpoints and layers, which is no easy task for any writer, and to go from relatively low budget horrors to outright blockbusters is something that can cause many up and coming directors to fall from grace. But Matt Reeves held firm, rewrote the story the studio wanted, and set Caesar on course to be one of the best protagonists ever, helped in no small part by the brilliant Andy Serkis, but also gave us one of the most compelling villains in cinema. I also love that some of Matt Reeves' alumni filled out the primary human cast, including Let Me In's Cody Smith-McPhee and Felicity's Kerry Russell. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes would go on to gross $710 million worldwide, holds a 90% critic and 88% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and is featured in a number of best of the decade lists I saw last year. 20th Century Fox put huge trust in Reeves, allowing him to rewrite the story, and with the catch of course being that he had to meet the release date that drove Wyatt out, Matt Reeves on his first major blockbuster very much swam with the sharks. With the huge success of Dawn, the the studio gave Matt Reeves and co-writer Mark Bombach all the time they needed to tell the story for the follow-up, War for the Planet of the Apes, which would round off this trilogy. When discussing the next steps for the story, Reeves stated, "As the story continues, we know that war is not avoided by the end of Dawn. That is going to take us into the world of what he is grappling with, where he is going to be thrust in the circumstances that he never ever wanted to deal with and was hoping he could avoid, and now he is right in the middle of it. The things that happen in that story test him in huge ways, in the ways which his relationship with Koba haunts him deeply. It's going to be an epic story." And true to his words, the story was epic. Whilst there is a minority out there that feel like they were lied to due to the film's title, the film was very much a character-driven piece that served as a perfect conclusion to this trilogy, with Caesar constantly at odds with himself and the decisions he must make, often needing allies with him since the beginning to set him on the right path. Reeves took some bold decisions with Bombach, choosing to write off some key players early on, a decision which has derailed some prequels in the past, Alien 3 being a primary example. There was less of a war in this and more of a conflict of ideologies between two prideful characters in Andy Serkis' Caesar and Woody Harrelson's The Colonel. Principal photography began in October 2015, running through until the following March on a budget of $150 million. Before making this movie, Reeves and Bombach watched an endless number of war and western films, as well as the original Apes movies. For Reeves, point of view is one of the most important things that you use in a story, and in a film where there are two conflicting points of views with pros and cons on both sides, it was important that they balance the two sides and ensure that no matter what, the audience had to have the point of view of the apes by the end of this story. To mention Matt Reeves' directing prowess in this film, we need only look at the scene depicting the fate of the Colonel and the way that so many things are said with just expressions from both actors on screen. These films rely so much on expression and gestures over dialogue, and whilst the actors clearly play a huge role in this, the director has to be able to map out those scenes for us and direct these actors so we are truly feeling what the filmmakers want us to feel. The fact primatologists that have seen this film praise the accuracy of the apes' mannerisms just shows the level of directing prowess that is available to see within this movie. The visualization can't be ignored either, as the final scene only got more heartbreaking thanks to orangutan Maurice delivering his first spoken sentences in this whole trilogy, being a decision made by Reeves in order to add weight to the climax as they were shooting that scene. War for the Planet of the Apes, despite criticism for misleading title, grossed $490 million worldwide with a critics score of 94% and an audience score of 84%. I promise not to keep you too much longer, as this has been a lengthy video, but do remember to click the like button and subscribe to the channel if you've made it this far. Now returning to the whole purpose of this video, is Matt Reeves underrated? In my opinion, yes. For a director with such consistent filmography that takes the time to pick his movies slowly, he certainly isn't talked about enough in comparison to other directors that have come into the spotlight in recent years. He's one of those directors that people know his name when you say it, but generally don't think about him beyond those occasions. As a director who takes great care with his directed projects, who devotes so much passion to them and respect to the films that came before it, and to deliver films that consistently make money at the box office and are consistently well reviewed, it seems to me that he is highly underappreciated, and I have no doubt that when the Batman releases, it will be another hit, and hopefully with it, Matt Reeves will finally get the recognition he deserves. But what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to see more video essays like this, drop a like on the video and consider subscribing for more content like this coming all the time. My name is Josh, your Movie Apprentice, and I am going to leave you with the following quote from Reeves discussing the Batman. I have loved the Batman story since I was a child. He is such an iconic and compelling character, and one that resonates with me deeply. I am incredibly honoured and excited to be working with Warner Brothers to bring an epic and emotional new take on the Caped Crusader to the big screen.